Our two countries, Denmark and Sweden, we have played a crucial role in the sexual revolution. Globally, when people think about the sexual revolution, they very often think of our two countries. We took the lead in the sexual revolution. And from the Swedish side, this blonde sex symbol is very often a symbol of the Swedish impact on the sexual revolution. This is a world-famous scene from Fellini's movie La Dolce Vita, by many film critics viewed as one of the most important films ever made. And Anita Ekberg was at the time, or because of this film, she became the world's kind of leading female sex symbol. I don't know if you've seen the movie. It starts very interesting. It starts with two helicopters flying over Rome. Under the first helicopter, there's a huge statue of Christ. And that statue is going to be moved from a church or a museum to another place. And behind that helicopter, there is another helicopter with 4 or 5 young male journalists. And their task is to cover the move of this Christ statue. So they're flying on very low over Rome. And then they come over a hotel roof where there is a swimming pool and a number of beautiful young girls in bikinis, sunbathing. And of course, that's so much more interesting for the journalist than the Christ statue. So they are telling the helicopter pilot to stop and start to circling over the women. And they try to make contact and can we phone and can we... And then you see the Christ statue just disappear away. That is Fellini's way of saying, we have a Christian history, but we are leaving that. Now it's the sexual revolution. And the rest of the film is about these young, beautiful people trying to establish different kinds of relationships. And the most famous scene is when Anita Ekberg is standing in the water of Fontana di Trevi. It's late in the night. It's a really beautiful scene. For the male eye, it has everything. This beautiful blonde is standing there, and the young man is standing outside the water, and she says, Marcello, Marcello, come! And he walks out in the water and approaches her. And it's really high tension. And precisely when they're going to touch, the water stops to flow. It just becomes silent. And the spell is lost. And they do not touch. And they walk away in silence. If you look at the movie, people think it's wow, this is a celebration of the sexual revolution. It's not. It's so empty. People do not connect. They do not find meaning in sexual relationships. So it's an interesting and I think often misunderstood movie. It portrays the sexual revolution, but not as a success. It truly shows that Christianity, we have moved away from that, we now have a new focus, but that focus is not creating happiness. Well, if you want to understand the sexual revolution, you need to go beyond Denmark and Sweden in the 60s, 50s or 60s. You need to go back to Austria and Germany in the 20s and 30s. The man who coined the phrase the sexual revolution was Wilhelm Reich. And he was highly critical towards the Christian tradition. And he says, tradition, especially in relationship to how we have viewed sex, is the dead trying to suffocate the living. It's a very, it's a very smart expression, I think. Tradition is the dead trying to suffocate the living. Now, we cannot accept that. Why should the dead, the Christian tradition, destroy our lives? No, we need to promote a sexual revolution. And he published a book with that title, The Sexual Revolution. And he already saw that this revolution has already started. It is in progress, and no power on earth will stop it. And Wilhelm Reich, he believed that just in order to be healthy, you need to have at least 3 orgasms a week. So he's really focusing on just the physical aspect of sexuality. There is where you can find happiness. He, that is of course the Venus, the goddess of love, the birth of Venus. He also understood that his perspective starts without God. So, no meta-empirical authority of values. There's nothing above us. There are no values with authority above us as individuals. All that is left is vital energy, which can be identified with sexuality. So the whole kind of human life force is to be identified with sex. So you could say like this: the pleasure of living and the pleasure of the orgasm are identical. A kind of narrow perspective on life, you can say, but the pleasure of living and the pleasure of the orgasm are identical. Now, to be more concrete, what was the revolution that he imagined? The sexual revolution. It's this. We need to see the abolition of lifelong monogamous marriage. Of course, you're free to live in a lifelong monogamous marriage, but we cannot have that as a norm or as a value, or because you can express yourself sexually in many other ways, and you can have many different relationships and so on. So we need to destroy or abolish this Christian concept of an ideal of a lifelong monogamous marriage. We need to encourage infantile and adolescent sexuality. So we cannot say, okay, sex is for adults, for grown-ups, because we are sexual from the beginning. So adolescent, young people, and children, they are sexual. And we need to help people to explore and express their sexuality and not try to hinder or limit or put on hold sexuality, because that just causes problems. So we need to naturally just encourage sexuality all through human life. And the other side of that is the conviction that suppression is destructive. It's dangerous for us, really negative, to have a sexual impulse and then say no, to try to suppress it. But we need to let the sexual impulses be realized, to just let them out. Abstinence, to say no, I will not express myself sexually, is pathological. It becomes almost like a sickness, a disease, and it will affect you very negatively if you abstain from sex. And as a consequence of this, the category sexual perversion should be eliminated. So traditionally, the Christian faith has painted a certain area. Here is a good area where you can express sexuality, you can explore sexuality. It's a good thing, it's a beautiful thing, it's blessed by God, but there are limits. And outside, then you have, it takes on another dimension, sexuality. And you can talk about what is perverse, which is outside the norm, which is outside the design, the mind of God, you can say, what was his thinking. So perversity is when you go outside the norm. But this category needs to be abolished, because there's nothing perverse. You have different sexual expressions, different sexual acts, and they are not good, right, or perverse. They're just sexual acts. If one look at this program for revolution, you have to say it's been quite successful. I think he's failed in one. His revolution has not materialized on one point, and that is infantile sexuality. Our culture is even harder today against pedophilia and involving children. But you could say the other points of his program has been very successful. So our culture is moving exactly in this direction.
When did he write this?
In the 30s. 1930s. He fled Germany during the war, or before the war, and was ended up in the US. He was influenced by this man, Sigmund Freud. So he took some thinking from Sigmund Freud, and Sigmund Freud has an expression, something he called polymorphous perversity. Okay, strange words. Polymorphous perversity. Poly means many, and perversity in many forms. Polymorphous perversity. What does Freud mean by that? He means this. A child does not naturally know about sexual taboos. A child does not know about what we in culture call perversity, but naturally just accept many different things. So a child doesn't understand the taboo against sex between humans and animals. A child doesn't know the taboo against sex between brothers and sisters, or between parents and children. They don't understand the taboo against sex with someone of your own sex. This is added through socialization. So naturally, we are just born with this free sexuality, who does not see the taboos. But that is parents, culture, church. It is built into us through socialization. So the point of Freud's term is that for a child, there is a variety, plurality of what the grown-ups call perversity. And then the grown-ups press the norms, the taboos on the child, and that causes a lot of emotional problems for us. But in order to understand the sexual revolution, one needs to go beyond Sweden and Denmark, beyond Germany and Austria, and we need to go back to the French Revolution. So here's the connection between those two presentations. We need to go back to Marquis de Sade. The French nobleman, who was not at all noble in his thinking or in his behavior. It is from his name we have sadism, to feel pleasure by inflicting pain, to feel sexual pleasure by inflicting pain on another. That's from his name, because that was one of his favorite sexual things. He's called the founder of eroticism. He really understood that if there is no God, there is no limit to what we can do. Human life is a total free area with no boundaries. You can do whatever is possible to do, whatever you can come away with. And he practiced it, lived a horrible life, ended up in prison a number of times, wrote a number of really destructive books, which is a blend of philosophy and pornography, where he is having a lot of pornographic descriptions and blend them with philosophical reasoning why there are no limits to human sexuality. So he totally understands this view that if there is a God, then there is design, then there is limits, norms, but if there is no God, all that is gone, and we are totally free. As long as we can be physical limited. So of course we can inflict pain on someone and feel sexual pleasure for that. But if we are unlucky, they are more physically powerful than us, and then they can inflict pain on us. So of course there are limits, but it's only physical limits. You can do whatever your strength makes it possible for you to do. So the sexual revolution actually has its roots back here. It's a child of the French Revolution, of the secular enlightenment, of the dethronement of God and the replacement of God with the human individual. The result is that we have put a split between things that traditionally were connected. So there is a split between sex and marriage. Of course you can have sex within marriage, but you can also have sex in many other different relationships. There's a split between sex and love. Of course you can have sex with someone you love, but you can also have sex with a lot of other people that you're not connected to, you do not love, you do not have a commitment, you do not have feelings for them, you just have sex. You play badminton with some people, you have sex with some people, and there's no commitment or love or relationship. It's just a partner for that activity. You can have sex in a more permanent relationship, you can have a one-night stand. Of course we have sex so we can have children, but we do not need to take that into account when we are thinking about sex. We can of course have sex in what is a natural way for the body, but we can have sex in many other ways, or we can ignore the body and start to define ourselves regardless of the body. So we have isolated sex, we have moved sex out to something on its own. The different sexual acts and the pleasure around sexuality, we have kind of isolated that. That is something in itself. And you're totally free if you want to connect it with something else, or you just want to drink from the fountain of sex itself. You don't have to connect it to anything else than your own sexual pleasure. When described in that way, it's a very radical view of sex. In our culture, this has happened gradually. Most people do not move from a fully Christian understanding to a Marquis de Sade libertinistic view. It's something for most people and places. It takes time, it's gradual, it's a moving process like this. So our culture, we have moved from an ethic of commitment in its highest form, lifelong marriage, for better or worse, until death do us apart. That is the context for sexual expression. That is the traditional view. Ethics with a high level of commitment, the highest form of commitment for the rest of my life. Now we move from that to kind of ethic of closeness. During your life you have a series of relationships that are sexual, but it's still important that we care for each other, that we love, that we are committed, but we are not committed for life, we are committed for now. And that now can be a shorter or it can be a longer period of a number of years, but it's not a final commitment. So we are close to each other. We don't have sex with anybody, but with someone we have feelings for, that we actually care for. but we're not committed on this high level. And from that we have moved to ethics of pleasure, where you can think of sex as just lust and mutual enjoyment, friends with benefits. So here is a process where we gradually have changed our view on sex. Or to take another aspect, I would say that we have made male sexuality as the norm. What do I mean? Well, in the past, our culture called women to be chaste. A deeply wrong perspective where our culture said, well, men have a stronger sexual urge, they don't really can control it, they're not really responsible, so it's up to women to regulate sexuality so it does not become chaos. And if it became chaos, it's probably the women's fault. So a horrible perspective of holding men irresponsible and laying the burden of women, who in the culture on so many other aspects were in a weaker position. Anyway, okay, that was the traditional view. Today, a lot of voices have challenged women to pursue sex like men, saying men have explored sexuality, have tried to grab after sex. Now, women should do the same. Women should start to copy men's attitude towards sex. And so much, at least in the Swedish debate, have been about empowering young women sexually. So they start to think and act in terms of sex like men have traditionally done. Now, in both cases you can say the norm, both in the past and today, is male sexuality, and in my view, fallen male sexuality has been made into the norm of our culture. That's really a stupid move. The alternative is, of course, to encourage men to be responsible. That is one of the great challenges we need. Men need to be more responsible in terms of sexuality. There is a slight move in that direction through Me Too, I will come back to that. But it's not, I don't think that the challenge is fully there. And that's such a weakness for our culture, that we make fallen male sexuality the norm for both sexes. Or to formulate it more in terms of the New Testament and the fruits of the Spirit, to challenge both men and women to grow in self-control. Sexuality is an area where both men and women need to grow in self-control and explore what is a healthy and good way of expressing our sexuality. It's not strange if the roots of the sexual revolution goes back to Marquis de Sade, that it is fallen male sexuality that has become the norm for our culture. It follows from there. A third way of trying to describe this process is, how do we understand the sexual union? What is our understanding of this act of two bodies coming together? The traditional way of understanding the act itself is that it is a sign of unity. It's a covenantal sign. It's a manifestation of belonging. And that's why in the traditional Christian view, you don't have sex until after the marriage. And in the marriage ceremony, you are challenged. Do you take this? Then the name, this person. Do you take the name to honor and love in poverty and in wealth and health and sickness and until death do you apart? And both answers yes. So you commit the rest of your life to the other person, and you commit yourself to the other person. And then you manifest what you just said with your mouth, I belong to you for the rest of my life. You manifest that in showing you belonging with your bodies. So that is a sign of the unity that was established in the marriage ceremony. And then that is a sign which you repeatedly come back to individually renew your marriage together, to give this sign, yeah, we belong. We belong together. We are committed to each other. Now, we have changed that view. Firstly, to you don't need to have that really high level of commitment. Sex can be an expression of love. It's an intense emotional exchange between two people who care for each other, and you do not need to go beyond that. It's an expression of love, feelings. But then that has moved to say, well, it's basically physical pleasure. It's the most potent body massage. And don't do anything more about it. It's really nice to have your back or your feet massaged. It releases endorphins. It's a good feeling, and this is just the most intense form of body massages. There is no significance to it, like there is no specific significance to have your shoulder massaged because you have some tension there. There's no significance beyond the pleasure, the well-being at the moment. And it's the same with sex. So you see, it's been this gradually change of understanding what is this. And all the way through, you have this question, is there a design or not? We need to come back to that. The Christian view is not built upon, there are certain verses in the Bible forbidding this or that, or affirming this or that. Now that is really important, of course, what the Bible teaches us. But the basic understanding from a Christian view is that there is a designer. There is a thinking behind this universe. It's not random what is here. Okay, so our culture has moved along this sexual revolution. Now, ideas have consequences, action has consequences. And you know, all revolutions promises utopia, promises paradise. You think of the communist revolution, 1970. Now, this is the path to a society without oppression, without poor people, with equality, with justice, with righteousness. So there's always a lot of promises connected with a revolution. And revolutions seldom delivers. That's the problem with those revolutions. Politically, we can see it so easy. They do not deliver on their promise. Have the sexual revolution delivered on its promises? Now, let me say two things. Firstly, it was not a paradise, sexually speaking, before the sexual revolution. There were so many problems, and so much that I am critical towards. You study the history of brothels in Europe. It's just horrifying. In Christian Europe, the number of prostitutes and brothels, because the demands from men was that high. It's absolutely horrible. So I'm not painting a glorious picture that has been destroyed through the sexual revolution. It was a very gory, very problematic history. There was some good thinking, but there was also a lot of really things. Secondly, not every aspect of the sexual revolution has been bad. A number of aspects have been really good. For example, that we can talk so freely about sex as we do here today. That we have affirmed female sexuality. If you look historically, it's been focused only on male pleasure, male enjoyment. So there's a number of positive things that has followed from the sexual revolution. I'm not at all denying that. And yet I'm highly critical. The consequences have been very negative for our culture. You look at family stability. Now, sexual revolution is not the only factor playing into that. There are other factors. But it's part of it. In Sweden today, more than 50% of marriages is falling apart. If you look at statistics for people just cohabitating, living together, the statistics are even worse. And people are suffering. They are in pain because we long to form long-term relationships. And we have increased difficulties in forming long-term relationships. That's very painful. In Sweden, there are over 35,000 abortions every year. That's very painful. You think of 35,000 children whose life was started and then ended before they were born. You think of 35,000 women every year. It's very, very painful for them. And you think of 35,000 men who often just step aside, but it's there in their mind too. So that's not the beautiful picture. If you study the statistics in terms of sexually transmitted disease, it's highly problematic. It's an epidemic. And people have for a long time said, well, we had, I don't know how you say it, penicillin. But the number of those are almost not working any longer for gonorrhea and syphilis. For chlamydia, that's one of the reasons behind infertility today. It's not the only, but for women who have had chlamydia, there is a risk of not being able to conceive in the future. And that's so painful in our society today. And in my book, I go through a lot of statistics in Sweden for a number of areas that I argue are directly or indirectly connected to the sexual revolution, and which is very negative. I don't think the sexual revolution has delivered. And it became very obvious in the Me Too movement, where we, I think, very clearly can see the fruits of the sexual revolution. And again, it's been so painful, especially for women. And we saw the Me Too movement all over the world. The biggest movement was in Sweden, the country most affected by the sexual revolution. And here is a connection. The sexual revolution has given a kind of free pass for men, which they have taken advantage for, and women have been fooled into certain ways of thinking that men have used. And I'm not the one saying this. Francis Fukuyama, most known for his work, The End of History. So he's a world-known historian and sociologist. He's written a book called The Great Disruption, and that is his terms for the last 50 years. The Great Disruption. And that is the time when the sexual revolution, who started back at the French Revolution, when those ideas finally took root in the whole of culture, not only in a small elite or in a cultural avant-garde, but for the population. And here is his evaluation. One of the greatest frauds perpetrated during the Great Disruption, during the last 50 years, was the notion that the sexual revolution was gender neutral, benefiting women and men equally, and that it somehow had a kinship with the feminist revolution, In fact, the sexual revolution served the interests of men, and in the end put sharp limits on the gains that women might otherwise have expected from their liberation from traditional roles. So he's actually blaming the sexual revolution and saying it's been a mistake for the feminist movement to think that they could be helped by the sexual revolution. On the contrary, the sexual revolution has undermined the aims of the feminist movement to create equality between men and women. I end here with one last slide, and we can then move into discussion and comments. I saw a photo of this sign. Please, no explanations inside the church. I guess it's one of the historical churches with a lot of tourists where guides are giving explanations of the altars and the paintings and so on, and it disturbs for people who want to pray and so on. But I think it's also a very timely sign or an ironic sign for the church. We have talking too little about sex. We need to be talking openly and deeply about sex. And we need to get rid of this shallow view that we can just repeat certain ethical norms. Don't do or do that, or no, that's sin or that's wrong. We need to have a deep discussion on how to understand sexuality and have a dialogue with our culture who moves in the direction of the sexual revolution. We cannot be silent. We can't just take for granted the traditional view. I'm not arguing that we should change the basic perspective, not at all. But we cannot just take it for granted. It needs to be explained and defended and explored in a much better way than we have done. Maybe I should end with another slide. This is an Australian Catholic talking, already back in 1953, but I really like this quote. He says, "The typical modern man practically never thinks about sex." What? Very strange, but hang on. The typical modern man practically never thinks about sex. He dreams of it, of course, by day and by night. He craves for it. He pictures it, is stimulated or depressed by it, draws over it. But this frothing, steaming activity is not thinking. Drawing is not thinking. Picturing is not thinking. Craving is not thinking. Dreaming is not thinking. Thinking means bringing the power of the mind to bear. Thinking about sex means striving to see sex in its innermost reality and in the function it is meant to serve. That's a beautiful passage, I think. And our culture is not thinking about sex. It's very much occupied by sex, but not thinking about sex in its innermost reality and in the function it is meant to be, it's meant to serve. And I don't think the Christian teaching on sex is doing much better. A little bit better, but we have a lot of work to do here in thinking about sex in its innermost reality and in the function it is meant to serve. Okay.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Very interesting with this broad perspective. I think I need to we need to give a little.
Tack ska ni ha. Pratar jag svenska får ni träna lite på det. Det som jag ska bara säga, det som jag gått igenom här finns ju i boken, och sen så finns ju framförallt ett försök att förklara och försvara det kristna perspektivet på sex. Jag har inte gått in på alla de olika aspekterna, så att säga. Hur ser vi då som kristna på sex och på alla de invändningar som vår kultur har kring homosexualitet och transsexualitet och så vidare. Så det finns massa material kring det. Men så här finns både den större bilden, vad är kulturen, det jag har försökt få igenom här, och sen ett försök att tänka utifrån både den allmänna och den särskilda uppenbarelsen, både utifrån skapelsen och skriften kring sexualitet.
Yes, I just need to KC det på dansk. Jeg tror ikke, vores kommunikation fra MF har været helt straight herop til. I læseplanen står der, at Stefan taler om sex, køn og identitetspolitik. Og det svarer jo rigtig meget til det, vi har hørt i dag. Og i din e-mail, vi har sendt rundt, der har vi highlightet homoseksualitet. Og det tror jeg bare, at vi lige skal have op i det åbne, så vi er klar over, hvad... Så jeg tror, der måske er en del studerende, der kan sidde med spørgsmål omkring homoseksualitet, så det kan komme op nu. Ja. Vi har så fået et bagtæppe og en baggrund for at diskutere det og forstå det. Og det betyder selvfølgelig ikke, at vi kun må spørge om homoseksualitet eller noget. Altså alle spørgsmål er velkomne, men jeg tror bare, at jeg har lige brug for at sige, at vi har ikke været helt klare i vores kommunikation. Det tror jeg også blander sig sådan nogle hoveder her i sagen. Men uanset så er det jo et emne, som er påtrængende, som vi har brug for at tænke over. Og vi har også brug for at tænke over, hvordan vi forstår det kristne syn på seksualitet i mødet med den brede strømning, som du så vældig fint har introduceret til. Så nu tager vi lige 2 minutter, 2 og 2, til at lige vente, reflektere lidt over det, og så åbner vi op for kollektiv samtale ret hurtigt. Så brug I tid på at tale og lige vende hovederne, og så går vi videre. Men jeg kan se, der er spørgsmål på vej fra Lærke.
Jamen altså, tak. Det var virkelig spændende. Ja, bare sådan lidt indledende. Hvad tænker du, at det her sådan historiske bagtæppe har at sige for, hvordan vi tænker, vi skal tænke om homoseksualitet? Eller hvordan påvirker det, hvordan du tænker om homoseksualitet, og måske også bredere end det, sådan LGBTQ+.
Just det, tack. Spelar det någon roll vilket språk? Är det bättre med engelska än svenska? Okej, några nickar. Okej. Thanks for a good question. I think it underlines the importance of ideas. That there are certain ideas behind what is happening. And what is happening now is not that we have any new scientific facts, for example, that forces a change in how we view things. But we don't. So, for example, we don't know what causes our sexual identity. Homosexuality is not genetically caused. That much we know through identical twin studies, because if it would be genetically caused, if one twin were homosexual, the other would be it, and that's not the case. For me the point is to see that a culture is shaped by ideas, and we have affirmed an idea that there is no God, therefore human beings are at the center. That means everyone can define themselves. And that has gradually opened the door, if we take the more extreme thing, that you can define yourself as something opposite your biological sex. So I could claim I am a woman, that my true inner self, my true inner identity, my soul is a woman. Unfortunately, for some strange reason, I was put into a male body. Now, let me say, just to be clear, I'm not denying the enormous pain people who are suffering with gender dysphoria are experiencing. That pain is real and can be real up to the level of people taking their lives. So we should talk with this, take that very seriously. The pain is real, but that does not mean that the explanation, your soul came into the wrong body, is true. There can be another explanation for the pain. And I would say a similar thing in terms of homosexuality, that it has to do with ideas, that the culture now embraces same-sex relationships and say they are equal to heterosexual relationships. It's because of ideas, that we have this idea that the human individual is the absolute norm. And how then can we say anything about the choice that the person is doing? So that would be my basic answer. It has not happened out of chance. It has not happened because of some new facts. Because as a Christian, I need to be open to facts, to truth, to reality. One should never deny reality, deny truth. But I don't think the new view is based upon some truth that are forcing us to change our view.
Men lige fortsætte lidt i spor for lige at spørge, om jeg forstår det helt rigtigt. Vil du sige, at al homoseksualitet er egentlig påvirket af samfundet og tænkning, og ikke er genetisk bestemt?
Yeah, let me... If you want to study it, you can. If you Google this article, it's a quite recent article from Science. How do genes affect same-sex behavior? That is the latest presentation of twin studies, and the conclusion is that there is some correspondence. So there is an increased likelihood. If one is homosexual, there is an increased likelihood that the other is, compared to the population in general, but it's a very small increase in likelihood. So the scientific position of today, it might be change, as all sciences are open for change and revision. The scientific position today is we don't know the causes of our different sexual preferences, interests, identities. Most people would say likely it's a mixture of genetics, social factors, your parents' upbringing, family, social context, your culture, and your choices. How you, as an individual, respond to your own genetics and to your social factors. And it's a mix that no one has been able to clarify exactly how does those three factors work together. So it's still a secret or a mystery. But you cannot argue that it's genetically caused, like the color of your eye or the color of your skin or and so on. And often the gay movement, they wanted to use this argument for. They claimed they have found a gay gene. So they said, well, okay, it's genetically caused. We have no choice. Therefore, it needs to be accepted. That was the line of reasoning. The claim was wrong. There is no gay gene. But secondly, it was wrong also in terms of, therefore, we need to accept it. Because you cannot go from genetics to ethics. A thing is not right just because it's biologically caused. Ethics, what is a right or wrong behavior, needs to be discussed regardless of the genetic background. So let's say that violence, you could find a violent gene which explains that some men is violence against women. Would that make it right? No, it would still be wrong. The action, regardless of its genetic background, it's still ethically a wrong act. So ethical issues needs to be discussed ethically, not in terms of genetics. And there are so many things. If I try to analyze them and to analyze. If I just think of my own, I still think I'm very young, okay? But if I think about my own lifetime, during my lifetime, the culture I've been a part of have had 4 distinct views on homosexuality. So when I was a child, the majority of Swedes, the dominant perspective was homosexual relationships are wrong. So a negative attitude, generally speaking. That moved quickly into the position, well, it's still not ideal, but for some people they don't have an option. There's no alternative. So, okay, we have to accept that some people live in a way that is not really ideal, but we have to accept it. So, a slightly more allowing attitude. That moved quickly into the position hetero and homo is equal. It's the same. They are equally valid, equally right, equally good, they are the same. We should view it as majority use the right hand, the minority use the left hand. It's not right or wrong, better or worse. It's just the variety, interesting variety. We have different skin colors and hair colors. It's a variety. It's just interesting. Don't make any distinction. And then in some groups it's moved up to the position gays have more fun. Actually, the homosexual lifestyle is more authentic. The gay culture is more creative. It's more fun. People who come out as homosexuals, they have not just followed the stream. They are authentic in a way the majority of the heterosexual world is not, because that world had just followed the kind of stream going along without. So you have four different views on homosexuality during my very short lifetime so far. And that has happened mainly through a number of cliches. If you try to analyze why have the culture changed, it's not because of new facts. It's mainly through a number of cliches that the gay movement has been really successful to plant in our culture. That it's about human rights, that it's about the equal dignity of all people. Or slogans like, love cannot be wrong. It's really important for us to analyze that kind of slogan. So, love can never be wrong. Totally agree. Totally agree. Of course love cannot be wrong. Love meaning care for, having compassion for, relate to, being involved with. Of course love can never be wrong. But sex can be wrong. I should love my parents, not have sex with them. I should love my kids, not have sex with them. I should love my friends, not have sex with them. Love can never be wrong, but I need to be really careful to think through in what relationship should my love have a sexual expression. Now, that was an example. If you study the last 30 years, our culture is filled with that kind of cliches that people do not analyze. What are we actually saying? It just sounds good, and then the culture moves one step further in the direction of saying hetero and homo is the same, even though it's actually not. Sorry, that was a long detour.
Hvordan tænker du, vi som kirke kan reagere og respondere på den her ændring i kulturen? Altså, jeg tænker, skal vi forsøge at ændre kulturen i Skandinavien, eller skal vi leve med det sådan, det er, og så give et bedre alternativ, eller hvordan reagerer vi på det her på en god måde?
Yeah, very important question again. I think it's gone too long. There's not much hope for us to strategically change our culture in those areas. I was very vocal 10 years ago when we had a big discussion in Sweden about changing the definition of marriage. Should we have same-sex marriage? Because I felt this is a key issue. If we lose this issue for 100 years, we will have same-sex marriage. We will have a new definition of marriage. And here is a key point where when we started our campaign in Sweden, 60% of the population were on our side. They did not want a change of the definition of marriage. But of course, we lost totally. And today, I guess 80-90% of the population is for same-sex marriage. And I'm not involved at all in arguing for we need to change our marriage law because that's too late. So what we have to do now is to fight for the church to keep on track and help Christians to understand the Christian view and help the culture to at least accept that we have a different view. If we can manage that, that's a great step forward. If people can understand why we beg to differ from the majority. So we need to totally change our mode from being folkekyrka during 400 years. Statskyrka i Sverige, being a Christian country for 1,000 years. Totally change mentality. We are a minority living in a secular culture. And we need to start to act like a minority and accept the big culture around us. They are moving in that direction. The most important thing we can do is to preach the gospel and start congregations to build the kingdom of God. And then we need to be this different voice in the public, which explain and also defend our view. But we need to do that from the minority position. Look at Paul. His first aim is not, now we should change the Roman Empire so they are not this promiscuous and living this horrible sexual lives. No, he's preaching the gospel, he's starting churches, he's helping the Christians. And what happened in the long term was that God used this growing Christian movement to then later on transform the whole Roman Empire. But we need to have our priorities right. And we need to, it will be so difficult in the coming years because of the chaos around us. We know it from the mission field where churches have had to deal with, here is a man coming to faith and he has 4 wives. And the wives have come to faith, what do we do now? And we need to have some wisdom. In some missionaries, they demanded that a man divorced his 3 latest wives to keep the biblical idea, and the consequences were horrible. Those poor women were just thrown out into poverty and maybe forced to become prostitutes, and just horrible. So then gradually the missionaries realized, okay, we need to work here with a broken reality. We need to try to make sure that polygamy is not continued into the next generation, but we need to show love and compassion and find wisdom in how we deal with a polygamous family that has come to faith. We will have many situations like that in the coming years. Let me give you an example from a good friend's church. there is a transsexual, a biological woman who have transitioned to become a man, who is now socially and legally a man, and he has come to faith, and so has his wife, because he, after transitioning, has married a woman. And now both have come to faith, and they want the pastor to bless their relationship and to join the church, and they are eager to take responsibility within the church, to have leadership functions, and they are gifted. So what do you do? Biologically, it's a kind of lesbian relationship, but because of hormones and operations, and it's very messy. It's really difficult. And they are two persons loved by God, and by God's grace, they've come to faith in Jesus. What do we do? I don't have an easy solution. We need to express both love and truth. From a Christian point of view, we have concerns about this whole idea of transitioning and not try to work with the body God has given to you. But when it has already happened, what do we do? So a lot of terrain that we can't look into the church father much, or church history, or it's a new terrain. Difficult, challenging. But God is still at work, and we need to go into those difficult situations.
Det her er måske et spørgsmål til både Claus og dig, fordi Claus er nytestament.
Ja.
Og jeg har store problemer med pervers i 1. Korinther 6. Der er ikke vild, hverken utugtige eller afgudstyrkere, eller ægteskabsbrydere, eller mænd, der lægger i med mænd, eller tyve eller griske mennesker, ingen drukkenbolde, ingen spottere, ingen røvere skal aflede sig i. Jeg kender flere alkoholikere, som er oprigtigt troende. Jeg kender også homoseksuelle, der er oprigtigt troende. Men det her, det fik en ny aktualitet med en ny oversættelse, vi har fået i Danmark, hvor der ikke står mænd, der lægger i med mænd, men der står homoseksuelle. Den ikke afgud sig i.
Hvad er det for at være præcis?
Det er 1. Korinther 1. Korinther 6, 9-10. Altså, har Paulus forstået? Altså, jeg synes ikke, det stemmer med retfærdiggørelsen af tro. Det er...
Eller har översättarna förstått Paulus? Alltså vi hade en tidig översättning, 81. De översatte också så med antingen homosexuella. Men det kritiserades väldigt eftersom det begreppet inte finns i antiken. Man tänkte inte sexuella läggningar. Och det har ändrats i senare utgåva av det som idag heter Bibel 2000. Där står det män som ligger med män, som ju är den mer ordagranna översättningen. Så det är ju själva begreppet homosexualitet och därmed homosexuella. Det myntas av en ungersk journalist på slutet på 1800-talet och kommer in i medicinska böcker och slutet på 1800-talet. Så det är ju ett nytt begrepp. Det som man är fokuserad på, det är inte att det finns olika sorters människor, utan det är att det finns olika sorters handlingar. Och ur ett judisk synpunkt, om man läser lagen från Sinai, så är det ju helt fokus på handlingar. Alltså du ska inte ligga med en man som man ligger med en kvinna, du ska inte ligga med nära relation, du ska inte ligga med ett djur, du ska inte, så det är ju helt handlingsbaserat, inte identitetsbaserat. Och det tycker jag det förvånar mig att om det är en modern ny dansk översättning, att man har valt den översättningen.
Det är ju fordi man önskar lägga avstånd till Paulus.
Ja, just det. Så då är det en ideologiskt val man har gjort då.
Men jeg synes stadigvæk, det er et problem. Altså teksten er et problem, også som den står på græsk, også som den står i den gamle oversættelse. Altså, kan alkoholikere og mænd, der ligger inde med mænd, ikke blive frelst? Altså, utugtige. Jeg synes, det er svært.
Mm. Och det är klart att det är att släppa in en nytestamentlig expert för att lösa problemet för oss. Alla sorters synder kan förlåtas och alla sorters syndare kan frälsas. Förstås utifrån evangeliet. Och samtidigt så finns det då handlingsmönster och levnadssätt som är i kontrast med Guds vilja och i kontrast med står i motsats till ett liv i lärjungaskap. Och då måste man försöka hålla de två sakerna samman. Och vi måste ju vara försiktiga med att peka på en individ och säga du kommer gå förlorad. Det vet ju inte vi. Däremot så har vi ju en undervisning utifrån Nya testamentet där man säger att det här är Guds vilja. Och om man uthålligt och medvetet väljer den vägen, då sätter man sig liksom i fara för sin frälsning. Och sen vet vi att här kommer in en massa problematik. Till exempel om vi tar med alkohol, där är det ju inte bara en persons val och vilja. Det kommer in en massa andra aspekter som försvårar situationen. Så här är ju en mängd saker, man får bara lägga det i Guds hand. Och så behöver vi hålla fortfarande en tydlighet vad menar vi är Guds vilja. Jag vet inte vad du säger, Claes?
Altså, jeg er fuldstændig enig med Stefan i, at man ikke skal oversætte det med homoseksuel. Altså, homoseksualitet i den måde, det er jo et moderne begreb. Altså, det opstår vel i 1800-tallet. Noget af det. Og homoseksualitet i antikken, altså det er sandsynligt, at Paulus han adresserer pæderastiske forhold. Det vil sige forhold mellem en voksen mand og en teenager, som fik til opgave at opdrage teenageren til voksenlivet, og dermed også introducere teenageren til den seksuelle verden. Og så det der med at oversætte det med homoseksuelle, det er helt her i skoven. Så jeg tror, at det er primært det, som Paulus tænker på. Homoseksualitet, det er også noget, der på en eller anden måde er løsrevet fra forpligtelsen generelt set i antikken. Altså det er utugtigt, fordi det er løsrevet fra en forpligtelse. Så det er ikke et identitetsspørgsmål, men det er bare mere et handlingslivsformsspørgsmål. Og så i forhold til spørgsmålet om retfærdiggørelseslæren, ja, der er jeg også helt enig med Stefan der. Så, du kan ikke være afgudstyrker, du kan ikke være ægteskabsbryder, du kan ikke være tyv og morder og så afgudsrig. Men du kan godt være en, der kommer til at slå et menneske ihjel og så afgudsrig.
Så det er en udfoldelse af, at vi kan ikke leve i synd.
Ja.
Altså,
Nej, afskyldende. Jeg tror, at Rasmus har været lidt på
Jeg kan mærke, at jeg er påvirket af samfundet. Jeg har svært ved at sige, at det at leve som homoseksuel er forkert. Jeg snakkede med en kvinde, som sagde, at hun vil ikke komme i kirke, fordi hun føler, at hun ikke er velkommen, fordi at vi siger nej til hendes måde at leve på. Hvad stiller vi op med det?
Yeah, I think we will meet more and more people who say that your view on sexuality, and especially homosexuality, is a hindrance for me to join the church or to become a Christian. I guess that will be more common. And that is of course painful. But I think we need to remind ourselves that the message of the gospel is totally inclusive for everyone, and yet Jesus is not adopting his message, so everyone say, yeah, I will follow you. A lot of people went away because his teaching was hard, and because the demands were too specific. But if we take another example, I think it's often helps us if we compare. So if we take polygamous relationship, we don't accept that in the Christian church. Actually, there's no, to my knowledge, no Christian church yet. I'm sure they will come, but we don't accept polygamous relationships. Okay, so we have the exact same situation here. So we have in Sweden now, because of the influx of so many refugees, and so we have in practice polygamous marriages in Sweden. They are not registered as polygamous, but in practice one man with several wives. Okay, a lot of Muslims are coming to faith. So what now with the wives? We see polyamory being more practiced, especially in the big cities. So, well, we have our view. We don't think that is in accordance with God's will. And in a similar way, we have the view with same-sex relationships. So I think we need to help people to understand that you cannot come to church with specific demands. I have chosen this lifestyle, and you need to affirm it. That's a strange view. We live in a pluralistic society where I need to accept that people differ from me, and people need to accept that I, as a Christian, or we as the church, we differ from a lot of choices people are making. And then, of course, you have to go into the whole discussion. Why do we reject polygamy? Let's start there. Okay, so the Christian church says God's idea is a monogamous relationship. One man and one woman for the rest of their lives. Why do we say that? For several reasons. Because the Bible teaches us so, but also from reality. Because romantic love in its highest quality has always been monogamous. You will not find any love poetry in history singing to Anna, Katrina, Maria, Louise at the same time. When you become deeply in love, it is the one. That is what all love songs is about. The one, the only, the exclusive, the unique. That's an aspect of love. So it makes sense that marriage is monogamous. Secondly, when you involve more people, there will be the power play between two persons is difficult. Ask anyone who's married. The power play, if you have more, becomes increasingly difficult. And in the traditional monogamous relationship, you will have a male dominance and a female subordination in a different way. So we would say here's something in relationship to message. And in terms of there's a lot of empirical studies done because polygamy is so common in Africa, for example. You can see that children are less well off in polygamous relationships. The results in school is not as good as in monogamous relationships, and their mental health and other things are less. So we would say there are some arguments from reality saying monogamy is to be preferred. Then what about same-sex relationships? How can you argue there? let me then first say that hetero and homo is absolutely identical in terms of the quality of love that can be expressed. So two men or two women can show compassion and love and kindness to the same degree as a man and woman. So there's no qualitative difference in how you can love each other and care for each other, and how you can hurt each other. On both sides, there can be really high qualities and deep destruction. So we are not saying on the one side everything is, or it's better in terms of how the relationship can function. So that's really important, especially since what we see now in our culture of more committed same-sex relationships is culturally quite a new thing. Historically in our culture, when people looked at homosexual relationships, it was the very promiscuous version, since it was not socially accepted for two men to be a couple. What was seen in the public was the very promiscuous homosexual lifestyle. But that has changed now. So, I would then say, okay, so it's equal in its ability to show love and affection, but there is still differences on some other areas. And I guess I mentioned some of them, that in terms of our bodies, in terms of the physiology, it's obvious that there is a better match between a man and a woman than between two persons of the same sex in terms of our sexual organs. Men and women are built for each other in another way than two of the same sex. Evolutionary, our sexuality, the main reason behind our sexuality is to multiply, to be fruitful. It can only happen in the heterosexual relationship. And that's not a small thing. The whole future of our culture hinges upon that. And today, when we are, I think, lying with language, we say those two women have had a child, but that's not true. They have always borrowed from the heterosexual side in order to have a child. So one basic aspect of sexuality can only be expressed within the heterosexual relationship. So that is a factual difference. And thirdly, in most instances, we value complementarity. So to have both men and women on a team, on a board, in the parliament. So we said it's not equally good if you just have the one version of humanity in place. You need both versions, male and female. So that's a little vaguer, the argument, but it's still there. There is a complementarity in when male-female meets, which is they are the same, they're human beings with the same dignity and value, created in God's image, and they are different. So there's this dynamic of the same and the different, which is not present in the same way in the same-sex relationship. So that would be a way of arguing for hetero and homo is not identical. There are differences, which from our perspective as Christians, it makes sense when the Bible makes this distinction that God's design is the male-female.
Det er lige opfølgningen på det før med Leif, fordi dit svar med, at det nok har handlet om racistiske forhold. Jeg slutter bare lige op, fordi vi har arbejdet lidt med det i undervisning. Altså det, jeg ved ikke om det kommer ud på et eller andet teologisk sidespor nu, men det ord Paulus bruger er arsenokoites. Altså arsen, mand, og koites, seng, samleje. Som refererer direkte tilbage til de to steder i GTA. Okay, jeg har lige fra vores kristen etikundervisning. Refererer direkte tilbage til i ordvalget til de to steder i GT, Leviticus 18 og Leviticus 20, som de eneste 2 steder i GT ud over Genesis, vi har talt om, altså om det her med seksualitet mænd imellem. Vil det ikke tale for ikke at forstå det som pæderastiske forhold, hvis det refererer tilbage i ordvalg til Gamle Testamente, eller hvad? Har det været praktiseret dengang? Altså, jeg synes egentlig også det argument, at arsen bliver brugt i stedet for arnær, som efter mit indtryk er det mere almindelige ord at bruge for mand af Paulus, men du må, det er bare lige en tanke.
Ja, altså, det kan jo være svært at vide, hvad Paulus har tænkt. Og det er jo ikke fordi, at jeg sådan bibelteologisk set ikke vil, hvad det hedder, knytte forbindelse mellem det, Paulus han siger der, altså Leviticus, eller hvad Paulus siger andre steder omkring for det skabelsesberetning. Altså, hvis vi nu tænker sig, hvem det er, Paulus skriver til deres horisont modtagerne i Korinth, så tvivler jeg på, at de fleste af den menighed, de giver Leviticus 18%. Så hvis du tænker på, hvad er det for en verden, han skriver ind i, så vil jeg mene, at det er sandsynligt, at det er sådan noget som et pæderatisk forhold, der kommer op i første omgang.
Det kan sådan set sagtens være, altså så skal jeg bare vide, at er det usandsynligt, at den menighed har haft Leviticus 18:20 i baghovedet, når begge ord her, arsen og koites, bliver brugt begge steder i Septuaginta i Leviticus der.
Det er jo utroligt svært at svare på.
Ja,
altså, vi ved jo utroligt lidt om menigheden, kan man sige, men det er jo ikke en jødekristen menighed. Så det er jo ikke for at sige, at så har Bibelen ikke noget at sige om andet end pæderastiske forhold. Så det er ikke ligesom bare for at sige, at den der oversættelse med homoseksuelle, den er jo faktisk stor. Men der er jo mange andre ting i skriften, der taler om seksualitet, som vi alle sammen, altså vi skal passe på med, at vi gerne vil have alle tekster nyt til til at sige det samme. Det gør ikke nødvendigvis. Men det betyder ikke, at der ikke er mere at sige. Det er det, der står i første Korinth 6.
Just to add a comment, the church in Corinth was founded out from the synagogue, so I would mainly argue that it would be reasonable to think that a number of people there were very well acquainted with Leviticus in the church of Corinth. Yeah, that's of course we don't know for sure about that. I recently read the biography of Paul by a liberal theologian, very well known, E.P. Sanders, and he's not a conservative. He thinks that the church should accept same-sex relationships. But when he goes through Romans, which is the most extensive passage in the New Testament on same-sex relationships, he uses quite strong language, saying this: as we reach the conclusion of the chapter, I should remind readers of Paul's own view of homosexual activities in Romans 1, where both males and females who have homosexual intercourse are condemned. This passage is completely unambiguous condemnation of all homosexual activity. And E.P. Sanders is not just anybody. He's really a big name in New Testament research. So in my view, it looks like that there has been, for a number of years, there's been a lot of discussion about Paul's view on same-sex relationships and different attempts to come around, especially Romans 1, and try to limit what Paul is condemning. But my sense in trying to follow the exegetical development is that more and more people move in the direction of Sanders, even if they don't personally agree with Paul. So Sanders says the church should not follow Paul because it's just Paul, but historically this is Paul's view. So that is if that is true, it's a strong argument for the traditional understanding of Romans 1.
Jeg var nødt til at sige også, at i antikken for eksempel, der er homoseksualitet oftest noget, der foregår mellem ulige arter. Det vil sige mellem en mand og en teenager, eller mellem en mand og en slave. Altså, så det er på en eller anden måde det, der er inden for horisonten, 1. Korinther 6, vil jeg sige. Det betyder ikke, at der er ikke mere at sige, men ja, det er bare for at sige, at den der oversættelse med, at det er homoseksuelle, altså, det er ikke det er ikke meningsfuldt.
Släppa in en ny röst.
Jeg har et spørgsmål angående kommunikation, fordi jeg synes, det er meget spændende, meget af det, du fortæller om, men meget af det, hvis jeg skulle prøve at formidle det videre med de ord, du har brugt, så vil det lukke samtalen med det samme, fordi at folk hører nogle ting, de hører, man bruger en analogi omkring incest, og så er den samtale slut. Så hvordan vil du formidle det her til en sekulær til en sekulær person?
Yeah, thank you. Totally agree with what you're saying. And the communication is so difficult. If I make a presentation of the Christian faith on a university, so let's say I'm talking about the existence of God, or the reliability of the Gospels, or science and faith, or the resurrection of Jesus, what's the first question? What's your view on homosexuality? Okay, I've just had a lecture presentation for 30 minutes on the existence of God. Okay. So then I say, okay, I'm happy to talk with you about that afterwards, but this is a presentation on the arguments for God's existence. Let's focus on that. Sometimes I can come away with that, but not always. So, okay, so if people press on, of course I need to try to relate to that question. So then I would say something like this. Okay. This is a question where I cannot give you an easy yes or no. So if you want to know my position, you need to give me a number of minutes in order to explain my thinking. Because we all know that these are deep and profound questions of when it relates to our sexuality, and we shouldn't minimize those questions to yes or no. And from a Christian perspective, there's a number of things that need to be said. So, are you ready to give me a number of minutes and follow me? I can respond. Okay, so let's say they are giving me that. Then I would say, okay. So, my starting point as a Christian is that everyone is created in the image of God. Therefore, all of us have the same dignity, regardless of who we are, regardless of our sexual preferences and interests and history, regardless of what we have done to others or others have done to us. We have dignity as God's image, and we are loved by God. And God calls us to himself, and he wants fellowship with us. So according to the Christian point of view, all of us are really valuable, important human beings that God wants to show love to. And if you have met Christians who have not shown love to you, they are not reflecting the faith they are proclaiming to have. Secondly, according to the Christian faith, something has gone wrong with all of us. The technical term is we are sinners. And the Bible places all of us at the bottom. Which means I cannot look down at anyone. Because if you're sitting at the bottom, there's no one below you. So, as a Christian, I cannot have contempt in that sense for other human beings, because we are on the same level. And here is a lot in the church history that is really ugly, where Christians have not showed what their own faith is telling them, that all of us have sinned and lost the glory of God. And we are sitting on the bottom, all of us. And that's why the Christian faith says that all of us needs forgiveness, all of us needs to be born again, to have a new start. And we can have that through Jesus Christ. That's the whole point of the center of the Christian faith, the message about Jesus, that all of us can have a new start and start to live in a relationship with God. Thirdly, as a Christian, I'm a strong proponent for a free society. You can live exactly how you yourself want, sexually. Be my guest. Of course, we need some limits, and you are not free to hurt another human being. So I'm sure we can find agreement on some really basic borders for our society. But within those very wide borders, you are free to live according to your own beliefs and preferences. I'm not there to try to limit your way of living sexually. So, because I want to have my belief and my way of life, and therefore I want to give freedom for you to have your belief and your way of life. And then we need to find some good ways to have dialogue with each other, because we come to different conclusions, and still we want to live in the same society. So let's help each other to have a civilized dialogue on issues where we have deep disagreements, but where we give each other freedom. So I give you freedom to choose your life and to have your own thinking, and I hope you will give me freedom to have my own thinking and choose my own life. Okay, so far I've not said anything about homosexuality. You realize what I'm trying to do? I imagine that the person who asks sits with in his hand with a number of balloons, and each balloon is representing a prejudice against the Christian faith, a prejudice against what I'm soon going to tell them. But I need to pick a hole in each balloon so the emotional pressure goes out before I can say anything more specific about the Christian view. So what I've done so far is I've tried to pick hole in the balloons to have the emotional tension to go out. So they are at least slightly more open to give me a hearing. Okay? So that was 3 points. My fourth point would be then say, well, you understood I believe in God. I just give you a number of arguments for God's existence. That means that if that is true, then there is a God who have created this universe, and then there is design behind this world. Then there is a will of God. And since I believe in God, my number one question is not what do I want, even though that's, of course it's important for me, but it cannot be the number one question. If there is God, I need to ask, what is the will of God for me? That will take priority over what do I want. And you can talk to anyone who believes in God. That question, what is the will of God, will sooner or later come up to a more top position. Now, if you don't believe in God, of course, the top position in terms of your question is, what do I want? Fully understand that. But you need to understand, I believe in God. So I ask, what is the will of God? Fifthly, so what then is the will of God? Now, you know, we Christians today disagree on that issue. So now I take refuge behind liberal theology. I do not do that often. But on this issue I do, because it helps people to relax. And it's a fact. Christians disagree on this issue. So as you all know, Christians disagree on this issue. The Lutheran Church in Sweden is a strong supporter of same-sex relationships and affirm it, and you can get married in the church. That is a position. The traditional position is saying, no, same-sex relationships are not in accordance with God's design. Why have we come to different conclusions? 2 different reasons. We differ in how we prioritize between the signals of the body and the signals of our inner being. Because our bodies obviously gives heterosexual signals. But then people can have a strong identity wanting to relate themselves to the same sex. So what should we give priority? The body or our inner B, Christians differs. And secondly, we differ in our interpretation of a number of crucial texts in the Bible. Does the Bible reject same-sex relationship as such, or does it reject same-sex relationships when they are connected with idol worship or pedophilia or violence? So it's not the same-sex aspect that is rejected, but something connected in the culture with same-sex relationships. So there are two reasons why Christians do not agree on this. So you can find different churches here. It's no secret, you can Google my name, that I argue for the traditional Christian position that we should give the singleness from our bodies priority, because I think that is a more objective side than the inner side. And I think that the best interpretation of the texts are the traditional interpretation that the Bible rejects same-sex relationships as such. Finally, you can never understand this position that I have if you don't understand this. Every culture have a number of values, and then a culture put a few values at the top, saying these are the key priorities. In order to live a fulfilled human life, at least these 2 or 3 things need to be in place. Our culture puts sex up in the top category of what is the most important in order to live a meaningful, fulfilled human life. We don't do that as Christians. We value sex, we think it's important, but you need to remember we follow a celibate man. Jesus Christ, we think he lived the most beautiful life ever, the most meaningful life ever, and he never expressed himself sexually. He didn't enter into sexual relationships. So we have a different priority. Sex is important, but it's not in what is defining your existence on planet Earth. We realize it's really important, of course, but we have another hierarchy in our values. Okay, something like that. Now, that is much easier to do when you stand on a platform and you have a public, and if you're sitting on a cafe and talking with someone, because then you cannot have a PowerPoint with 5 points and going through. So I totally feel the difficulties in talking about this. But in terms of communication, even if we're not staying on a platform, but we have a dialogue with people, we need to do, I think, what I did at the beginning, to affirm people, to get rid of a number of prejudices they have, that we hate gays, or that we are looking down on people, or that we think we are better, or that we want to regulate their sex life and have laws in place that forbid them to live as they want. Because those things, in my experience, are really deep within people. They think like we are the Talibans, and we are not. And we really need to formulate that.
Okay. Tusind tak skal du have. Jeg har lyst til at slutte af med noget, jeg selv kunne til at tænke på. Under din første forelæsning, det der, du siger sådan, at vores kultur lærer os at kigge indad for at finde ud af, hvem vi er, og finder ud af, at man er seksuelt væsen, og det er så det, man er i sin essens. Så kommer jeg til at tænke på, hvad vil man have sagt til det i antikken, eller vil man blive forfærdet, altså, fordi der vil man også kigge indad, men så vil man finde fornuften, og identificere sig selv som et fornuftsvæsen mere end et videnskabeligt væsen. Og så kommer jeg til at tænke på, hvad gør vi som kristne, eller hvad vil Paulus må sige til det der med, hvis vi skal finde ud af, hvem vi er, og vi så skal kigge ind, eller Paulus siger, at vi skal kigge ind af det råd, han aldrig vil give til mennesker. Fordi at Paulus har den opfattelse, at der er brug for en ny skabelse. Mennesket er ødelagt. Man kan ikke finde ud af, hvem man er i sin essens, ved at bare kigge indad. Og den nye skabelse kommer i stand ved tro og dåb og ved modtagelse af den hellige ånd. Når man modtager den hellige ånd, ifølge Paulus, så råber man Abba, far til Gud. Og det vil være Paulus' svar på det spørgsmål, hvem er du? Hvis du skal finde ud af, hvem du er, så skal du blive døbt og modtage den hellige ånd, så skal du få lov til at råbe Abba, far til Gud i himlen. Og så forstår du, hvem du er. Og så kan du begynde at tale om, det er den jeg er. Jeg er et barn af Gud. Så har jeg en seksualitet, som er brudt, som alle andre seksualiteter. Det må jeg finde ud af at leve med på den bedste måde. Hvad har Bibelen række af? Men tusind tak skal du have, Stefan, fordi du vil komme. Og det var så lidt for. Hans bog kan købes til 299 kroner, så benytter det. Der er rigtig